Almost every country in the world owes money to someone. As of 2025, the US owes over $37 trillion in debt. Japan owes over 200% of what their economy produces annually. Even Germany, known for fiscal discipline, owes about $3 trillion. But here's what might surprise you. This isn't necessarily bad. Today, we'll break down why countries get into debt, how they get money, and when debt becomes dangerous. We'll explore why countries borrow instead of just printing money and show real examples of what happens when things go wrong. Section 1. What is government debt? Government debt is money that a country owes to lenders. But who are these lenders? It's actually ordinary people and institutions. Most of the time, governments borrow money by selling bonds. A government bond is basically an IOU. The government says, give us $1,000 today, and we'll pay you back $1,050 in 1 year. That extra $50 is the interest. When you buy a government bond, you're lending to your country. Banks, foreign governments, pension funds, and your retirement account all lend to governments. China alone holds over $700 billion in US debt in 2025. Here's what makes government debt different from personal debt. When you max out your credit card, you pay it back with your paycheck. You can't force your boss to pay you more or print your own money. Governments have 3 powerful tools individuals don't. They can raise taxes to generate revenue, control laws that shape the economy, and work with central banks to influence money supply. Also called money printing. This is why government debt isn't automatically a crisis like personal debt can be. They're playing by different rules. Section 2. Why countries borrow money? So why do countries borrow money in the first place? There are 2 main reasons. Reason 1, economic emergencies. Sometimes bad things happen fast, like in the 2008 crisis and COVID-19 pandemic. When millions lose jobs overnight, governments must act immediately. They can't wait months to raise taxes. People need help now. During COVID, governments borrowed massive amounts to prevent economic collapse. The US alone borrowed over $3 trillion in 2020. They paid unemployment benefits, business loans, vaccine development. Raising taxes instead would have worsened the recession by taking money from people when they needed it most. Reason 2, economic growth. The second reason is investing in economic growth. This comes in 2 main forms. First is infrastructure investment, roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, expensive upfront but beneficial for decades. Building a high-speed rail network or expanding an airport boosts trade and creates jobs for years to come. Should government wait years to save cash? That means missing out on decades of economic benefits. Instead, borrow now. Build the infrastructure. Let the economic growth it generates help pay back the loan. Second is economic stimulus. When the economy is sluggish, governments can borrow money to fund spending programs that directly inject money into the economy. Both approaches are essentially the same bet, that the economic growth generated will exceed the interest cost of borrowing. If the economy grows by 4%, but you're paying 3% interest, you come out ahead. But if growth is only 2%, while paying 3% interest, the debt becomes harder to manage and you're worse off than before. Section 3. How countries get money. When a government needs money, they have 2 main options: borrow it or create it. Let's look at both. Method 1. Borrowing money. Governments can borrow at different interest rates depending on how risky lenders think the country is. The United States can borrow money at very low rates because investors trust that America will pay back its debts. This is just like personal credit scores. If you have great credit, you get low interest rates on loans. If your credit is poor, you pay more. For countries, investors look at factors like economic stability and government reliability to evaluate the ability to repay debts. Method 2. Printing money. Now here's where it gets interesting. Why don't countries just print more money instead of borrowing? After all, if you control the printing press, why would you ever need to take out a loan? The answer is inflation. When you print more money without producing more goods and services, each dollar becomes worth less. Think of it this way. If there are $100 chasing 100 apples, each apple costs $1. But if you print 100 more dollars without growing more apples, now you have $200 chasing the same 100 apples. So each apple now costs $2. More money, same stuff, higher prices. This is why countries are careful about how much money they print. Most countries do both. They borrow money through bonds and also create new money through their central banks. The key is balance. Print too much too fast and you get inflation. Print too little during a crisis, and the recovery might be slower and more painful. Taking on debt has different trade-offs. It doesn't immediately cause inflation, but it creates obligations that eventually need to be repaid. Section 4. When debt becomes a problem. Not all debt is created equal. Here are 2 warning signs that a country's debt is becoming dangerous. Sign 1. High debt to GDP ratio and interest payments. The debt to GDP ratio compares debt to the economy's size. Why does this matter? Because a larger economy generates more tax revenue to pay back debt. If a country has $100 billion GDP and $50 billion debt, that's 50% ratio may be manageable. But if debt grows much faster than the economy, eventually the country can't generate enough tax revenue to service the debt. The real danger appears when interest payments eat up too much of the budget, say 20% or 30% of tax revenue. This creates a debt spiral. High interest payments mean less money for everything else, slowing growth, reducing revenue, making it harder to pay interest, causing lenders to demand even higher rates. There's no magic number, but when the ratio keeps climbing year after year, it signals trouble ahead. Sign 2. Nobody wants to lend. The most dangerous sign is when investors lose confidence and stop buying bonds or demand extremely high rates. This happens when a country shows signs it might default, missing payments, rapidly growing debt, or political instability. Once lenders fear they won't get their money back, they either stop lending or charge rates so high that borrowing becomes impossible. This forces countries into painful austerity, cutting spending and raising taxes at the worst time, often making problems worse. Section 5. Hidden costs and global dependencies. Government debt isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It creates complex relationships between countries that can affect sovereignty and power. When developing nations borrow from institutions like the International Monetary Fund, they often face strict conditions. The IMF might require cutting government spending, privatizing industries, or changing economic policies. This gives lenders significant influence over domestic decisions. China's Belt and Road Initiative offers another example. China lends money to developing countries for infrastructure projects. When countries struggle to repay, China can gain control over strategic assets, like when Sri Lanka handed over a major port on a 99-year lease in 2017 after struggling with Chinese loans. Critics call this debt trap diplomacy. Even wealthy nations face dependencies. The US relies heavily on foreign buyers for its debt. As of 2025, Japan holds over $1 trillion and China holds about $750 billion of US debt. This creates economic interdependence. If these countries suddenly stopped buying US bonds, interest rates could spike and cause major economic disruption. But it goes both ways. These countries also need stable US bonds to hold their reserves. This shows that debt creates not just financial obligations, but political and strategic relationships that shape global power dynamics. Section 6. Real-world examples. Let me show you 2 real examples that illustrate these concepts perfectly. Example 1. Greece debt crisis. Greece shows what happens when everything goes wrong. By 2009, debt reached 145% of GDP. The real problem wasn't just debt size. Greece's economy was built on unsustainable spending. The government borrowed for years to fund generous pensions and high government salaries. When 2008 hit, tax revenues collapsed, but spending remained high. Investors realized Greece might not pay back debts. Interest rates jumped from 4% to over 25%. Greece needed bailouts from other European countries. In exchange, harsh austerity, cutting pensions, firing workers, raising taxes. Result? GDP fell 25%, unemployment hit 27%, living standards collapsed for a decade. Example 2. United States, high debt. The US has over $36 trillion in debt as of 2025, about 124% of GDP, yet investors worldwide still consider US bonds among the safest investments. But this doesn't mean US debt is risk-free. The US benefits from unique advantages. The dollar is the world's reserve currency, which means central banks around the world need to hold dollars as reserves. US Treasury bonds are the safest way to hold those dollars, creating constant demand for US debt. During crises, investors often flee to US bonds for safety, further increasing demand. America also has a large, diverse economy with established institutions. However, these advantages aren't permanent guarantees. Nobody knows exactly how much debt the US can handle before problems arise. If investors lose confidence, if the dollar loses reserve status, or if debt grows much faster than the economy, even the US could face serious problems. This shows that while some countries have special advantages, there's no clear limit on how much debt is safe. Testing those limits probably isn't a good idea, since finding out the hard way could be catastrophic. Section 7. Historical cycles of debt and power. Throughout history, the world's great powers have used debt to finance their dominance, and their decline often followed. This pattern repeats across centuries. Spain in the 1500s borrowed heavily to fund its vast empire and constant wars. Despite controlling gold and silver from the Americas, Spain defaulted on its debts multiple times and eventually lost its superpower status. Britain financed 2 world wars, largely through debt. By 1945, British debt exceeded 200% of GDP. The cost of victory meant the end of the British Empire and the loss of its position as the world's leading economy. The United States today follows a similar pattern. America built its global influence partly through debt, financing the Cold War, military operations worldwide, and maintaining its position as the dominant superpower. Whether this leads to a similar decline or a different outcome depends on how wisely that debt is managed. This historical pattern shows that debt isn't just an economic tool, it's deeply connected to global power. Nations that use debt to invest in productive capacity can rise. Those that borrow to maintain unsustainable positions often fall. Conclusion. So, is government debt always bad? Absolutely not. Government debt isn't like personal debt. Countries can raise taxes, print money, and control economic policy in ways individuals can't. It depends on what the debt funds and whether it's managed responsibly. Good debt finances investments that generate future returns, infrastructure, education, research, or emergency response. Bad debt pays for ongoing expenses that don't boost economic growth. The key is whether you're investing in the future or just avoiding difficult budget decisions. Next time you see debt headlines, remember the numbers don't tell the whole story. What matters is what the debt funds, how it compares to the economy's size, and whether the country can manage it effectively. If you found this helpful, subscribe for more economics explained in simple terms. Thanks for watching.